Standing in my kitchen at 9:30 on a Tuesday evening staring at my phone screen, I felt my entire world crumble beneath my feet. There it was, posted on Facebook for everyone to see. My own mother had written these exact words about my 6-year-old daughter, Emma. The stupid burden finally got picked up by her dad. What a relief. Below that cruel post, my sister Jessica had commented with 3 words that cut even deeper. "Congrats, Mom." I read those words again, hoping I had misunderstood anything. But there was no mistake. My mother Linda had just publicly called my innocent little girl a burden. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down on the granite countertop. Emma was upstairs in her bedroom, probably brushing her teeth and getting ready for bed, completely unaware that her grandmother had just humiliated her in front of our entire extended family and community. The worst part was that Emma adored my parents, especially my mother. She always asked when we could visit Grandma Linda and Grandpa Robert again. I needed to understand how we had gotten to this point. 2 years ago, when my ex-wife Sarah decided she wanted nothing to do with being a mother anymore, my parents had stepped in to help. Sarah had walked out on Emma and me when Emma was only 4 years old, claiming she felt trapped and needed to find herself. She moved across the country to California, leaving behind divorce papers and a little girl who kept asking when Mommy was coming home. During those early months of single parenthood, I was drowning. Working as a construction foreman meant long hours, and finding reliable childcare was nearly impossible. My parents lived just 15 minutes away in the same suburban neighborhood where I had grown up in Toledo, Ohio. Linda had retired from her job as a bank teller, and Robert was semi-retired from his plumbing business. They seemed genuinely happy to help care for Emma while I worked. For almost 2 years, this arrangement had functioned smoothly. I would drop Emma off at 7 in the morning before heading to whatever construction site my crew was working on that week. My parents would pick her up from kindergarten, help her with homework, feed her lunch, and keep her entertained until I finished work around 5:30 each evening. Linda always seemed to enjoy having Emma around. She would brag to her friends at church about what a smart granddaughter she had, how well Emma was doing in school, and how proud she was to be helping raise such a wonderful little girl. But over the past few months, I had started noticing subtle changes in both Emma and my mother. Emma had become increasingly withdrawn and clingy. She would have meltdowns over small things that never used to bother her. When I asked about her day at my parents' house, she would give short, vague answers instead of the enthusiastic stories she used to share. Sometimes I would catch her staring off into space with a worried expression that seemed far too mature for a 6-year-old. Linda, meanwhile, had begun making snide comments about my parenting choices. She criticized everything from the clothes I bought Emma to the bedtime routine I had established. She started making remarks about how difficult it was to watch Emma every day, how much work it involved, and how I should be more grateful for everything she was sacrificing. These comments always came wrapped in a thin veneer of concern for Emma's well-being, but they stung nonetheless. The day that led to this devastating Facebook post had started normally enough. I picked Emma up from my parents' house at 6:15, slightly later than usual, because we had encountered problems with a foundation pour that required my immediate attention. When I arrived, Emma was sitting quietly on the living room couch, her small hands folded in her lap, staring at the carpet. She barely looked up when I entered the room. "Emma, sweetie, Daddy's here," I had called gently, crouching down to her level. She nodded, but did not smile. Usually she would run to me with excitement, chattering about her day and showing me any artwork she had created. This time she simply stood up, gathered her backpack, and walked silently to the car. During the 20-minute drive home, I tried multiple times to engage her in conversation. "How was school today? Princess, did you have fun with Grandma and Grandpa? Did you finish your math worksheet?" Each question received only a one-word response or a small nod. When we arrived home, Emma went straight to her bedroom without eating the dinner I had prepared. She claimed she was not hungry, even though grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup was her absolute favorite meal. Something was clearly wrong, but every time I asked, she insisted everything was fine. After putting her to bed and reading 3 chapters of Charlotte's Web, I had settled in the kitchen to catch up on some paperwork. That was when I decided to check Facebook, thinking I might see photos of Emma that my mother had posted throughout the day. Linda was constantly taking pictures of Emma and sharing them with family members online. Instead, I found that crushing post that made my stomach drop to the floor. My phone buzzed with a text message startling me out of my shocked trance. The message was from Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor who lived in the house directly behind my parents' property. Her backyard fence lined up with theirs, and she had a clear view of their outdoor space. Marcus. I hope you do not mind me reaching out, but I felt you needed to know what I witnessed today. Around 3 o'clock this afternoon, I was watering my tomato plants when I heard loud yelling coming from your parents' yard. I looked over and saw your mother shouting at little Emma. She was calling that precious child terrible names, saying she was worthless and a mistake. Your father was standing right there watching it happen, but he did not say a single word to stop her. Emma was crying so hard she could barely breathe. I wanted to call out, but I was so shocked I did not know what to do. I am so sorry, but I thought you should know. The blood drained from my face as I read those words. My hands began trembling again, and I had to read the message 3 times before it fully sank in. My mother had been verbally abusing my daughter while my father stood by and allowed it to happen. No wonder Emma had been so quiet and withdrawn when I picked her up. No wonder she had been acting differently these past few months. I thought about every time I had left Emma in their care, trusting them completely to treat her with love and kindness. I thought about every time Linda had smiled at me and assured me that Emma was no trouble at all, that she was happy to help. All this time behind my back, she had been tearing down my little girl's spirit and sense of self-worth. The Facebook post suddenly made horrible sense. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment or a poorly chosen phrase. This was how my mother really felt about my daughter. Emma was not a beloved granddaughter to her. She was a burden, an inconvenience, something to be endured rather than cherished. I saved Mrs. Patterson's message and screenshot the Facebook post before Linda could delete it. Then I sat in my kitchen staring at these pieces of evidence and trying to process the magnitude of what had been happening under my nose. Sleep was impossible that night. I spent hours pacing around my house, checking on Emma every 30 minutes to make sure she was sleeping peacefully. Each time I looked at her innocent face, I felt a surge of protective fury, unlike anything I had ever experienced. My mother had betrayed not only my trust, but had damaged the one person in the world who mattered most to me. By 7 in the morning, I had made my decision. I called my supervisor and explained that I had a family emergency and would not be able to work that day. Then I arranged for Emma to spend the day with my friend Jake's wife, Monica, who had always been wonderful with children and had offered to help with Emma whenever I needed it. "Are you sure everything is okay?" Monica asked when I dropped Emma off at 9. "You look like you have not slept at all." "Just some family drama I need to sort out," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Emma might be a little quiet today. She had a rough day yesterday." Monica, who was a kindergarten teacher herself, immediately picked up on the underlying tension. "Do not worry about anything. Emma and I will have a great day together. Take all the time you need." The drive to my parents' house felt simultaneously too long and too short. Part of me wanted to turn around and avoid this confrontation altogether. Another part of me wanted to speed through every red light and get there immediately. By the time I pulled into their driveway, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Robert answered the door, looking surprised to see me. "Marcus, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at work? Where's Emma?" "We need to talk," I said, pushing past him into the familiar living room where I had spent countless hours as a child. All 3 of us. Linda emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was wearing the same floral apron she had owned for 15 years, and for a moment she looked exactly like the loving grandmother I thought she was. "What's wrong, honey? You look upset." I pulled out my phone and showed them the Facebook post. "I want you to explain this." Linda glanced at the screen and shrugged, her expression shifting from concern to mild irritation. "Oh, that. Marcus, you are being way too sensitive. It was just a joke. A joke, I repeated, incredulous. You called my daughter a stupid burden, and you think that's funny. You know I did not mean it that way, Linda said, her voice taking on a defensive tone. Emma is she's a lot of work, Marcus. More work than you realize. She's demanding and difficult, and frankly, she's been getting on my nerves lately. I stared at my mother, searching her face for any sign of remorse or recognition of how cruel her words had been. Instead, I saw only irritation and a stubborn refusal to acknowledge that she had done anything wrong. She's 6 years old, Mom. She's a little girl who lost her mother and depends on the adults in her life to make her feel safe and loved. How could you possibly think it's okay to call her names like that, especially on social media, where everyone can see it? Linda rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. Marcus, you need to toughen up. The world is not going to coddle Emma the way you do. She needs to learn that life is hard and people are not always going to be nice to her. I'm actually doing her a favor by teaching her these lessons now. I turned to my father, who had been standing silently by the fireplace during this entire exchange. Dad, do you agree with this? Do you think it's okay for Mom to talk about Emma this way? Robert shifted uncomfortably and avoided eye contact. Your mother has been under a lot of stress lately, he said quietly. Taking care of Emma every day is more work than we expected. Maybe we need to talk about finding alternative childcare arrangements. The fact that my father could not even bring himself to defend Emma or acknowledge how wrong Linda's behavior was made my anger spike even higher. Alternative arrangements. Dad, she called my daughter stupid. She humiliated her online. And according to Mrs. Patterson, yesterday was not the first time she has been cruel to Emma. Linda's face flushed red. That nosy old woman needs to mind her own business. She does not know what she's talking about. So you are denying that you yelled at Emma yesterday. You are denying that you called her worthless and a mistake. I may have raised my voice, Linda admitted grudgingly. But Emma was being particularly difficult. She spilled juice on my new carpet and then had the nerve to argue with me when I told her to clean it up. A little discipline never hurt anyone. I felt like I was looking at strangers rather than my own parents. The people who had raised me, who had taught me right from wrong, were now defending psychological abuse of a 6-year-old child. Even worse, they seemed genuinely confused about why I was upset. Mom, she's 6. 6-year-olds spill things. They make mistakes. They need patience and understanding, not verbal abuse. Verbal abuse. Linda laughed bitterly. You are being ridiculous, Marcus. I am not abusing anyone. I am trying to teach that child some respect and responsibility. Something her father apparently has no interest in doing. The conversation was spiraling rapidly, and I realized that Linda was not going to admit wrongdoing or show any remorse. If anything, she was doubling down on her position and becoming more hostile by the minute. That was when I heard small footsteps on the stairs behind me. I turned around to see Emma peeking around the corner, her eyes wide and uncertain. My heart sank as I realized she had been in the house the entire time. Emma, I said, confused. Sweetie, what are you doing here? I thought you were at Monica's house. Emma stepped into the living room clutching a small stuffed rabbit that she had apparently left behind yesterday. I forgot Mr. Whiskers, she said quietly. Monica drove me back to get him. Linda's expression immediately changed to one of forced sweetness. Well, hello there. Princess Grandma did not know you were here. But Emma did not run to Linda the way she usually did. Instead, she walked directly to me and wrapped her small arms around my legs. Looking up at me with those trusting brown eyes, she said the words that shattered my heart into a million pieces. Daddy, Grandma Linda said Mommy left because I'm bad. She said I'm the reason Mommy does not love me anymore. Is that true? The silence in the room was deafening. Linda's face went pale, and Robert looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I knelt down to Emma's level and pulled her into a tight hug, trying to find words that could undo the psychological damage that had already been done. No, sweetheart, I whispered into her hair. That is absolutely not true. Mommy left because of problems that had nothing to do with you. You are perfect exactly the way you are, and I love you more than anything in the whole world. Emma pulled back slightly and looked at me with an expression that was far too serious for such a young child. Grandpa Robert has been recording everything on his phone, she said matter-of-factly. He has lots of videos of Grandma saying mean things. Every adult in the room froze. I slowly turned to look at my father, who had gone completely white and was staring at Emma with a mixture of shock and panic. Dad, I said slowly, what is she talking about? Robert's hands were shaking as he reached into his pocket and pulled out his smartphone. The device looked almost foreign in his weathered hands, despite the fact that he had owned it for over 3 years. He stared at the screen for several long seconds before finally looking up at me with guilt written across every line of his face. I can explain, he said in a voice barely above a whisper. Linda was staring at her husband with an expression of complete betrayal. Robert, what did you do? I documented everything, he said, his voice growing slightly stronger. Every time you lost your temper with Emma. Every cruel thing you said. Every moment when you made that little girl feel worthless. His eyes filled with tears as he looked at Emma, who was still clinging to my leg. I could not stop you, but I could not let it continue without some kind of record. My mind was reeling. Show me, I said. Robert's fingers fumbled with the phone screen as he navigated to his voice recording app. The list that appeared made my stomach turn. There were dozens of entries, all dated within the past 4 months, with descriptions like, Linda yelling at Emma about homework, Linda tells Emma she is stupid, and Linda says Emma ruined her retirement. He selected the most recent entry dated yesterday afternoon. Linda's voice filled the room sharp and angry in a way I had never heard before. Stop crying, you little brat. No wonder your mother did not want you. You are nothing but trouble and noise and mess. I used to have a peaceful life before you came along and ruined everything. Your father is too blind to see what a burden you are, but I am not. Emma's small voice could be heard in the background sobbing and saying, I'm sorry, Grandma. I did not mean to spill. I'm sorry. Sorry does not clean up messes, Linda's voice continued. Sorry does not give me back the quiet afternoons I used to enjoy. You are 6 years old. You should know better by now. I felt physically sick listening to my mother's voice saying these things to my daughter. But Robert was not finished. He selected another recording from 2 weeks earlier. Emma, stop asking when your daddy is coming home. He drops you off here because he does not want to deal with you all day. Just like your mother. Nobody wants a whiny, clingy little girl around all the time. You need to learn to be independent and stop bothering people. Each recording was worse than the last. In some, Linda could be heard telling Emma that I was probably going to send her away to live with strangers because taking care of her was too much work. In others, she suggested that Emma's mother had been smart to escape before Emma got even more difficult to handle. There are 43 recordings, Robert said quietly. Going back to September. That's when I started noticing how you talked to her when you thought nobody else could hear. I looked at Linda, who had sunk into her favorite armchair and was staring at her hands. How could you say those things to her? How could you be so cruel to an innocent child? You do not understand the pressure, Linda said without looking up. Day after day, every single day responsible for someone else's child. I never wanted to be a full-time babysitter at this stage of my life. I raised my children already. I was supposed to be enjoying my retirement, not changing my whole schedule around a 6-year-old's needs. Then why did not you just say no when I asked for help? I demanded. Why did you pretend to be happy about it and then take your frustration out on Emma? Because you would have fallen apart without our help, she snapped, finally looking up at me. You were barely holding it together as it was. And what were your other options? You could not afford full-time childcare on your salary, and you did not have anyone else to turn to. I realized with growing horror that Linda had felt trapped by the situation, but had chosen to punish Emma for it, rather than communicating honestly with me about her feelings. Even worse, she had been systematically undermining Emma's sense of security and self-worth as a way of expressing her own frustration. Robert selected another recording, this one from just 1 week ago. "Listen to this one," he said grimly. Linda's voice came through the speaker again. "Emma, I need you to understand something. Your daddy works very hard, and when he comes home, tired, the last thing he wants to deal with is a clingy little girl who needs constant attention. That is why he leaves you here with us so much. He needs a break from you. All parents need breaks from their children, but some children are more work than others." My heart broke all over again as I heard Emma's small voice asking, "Is Daddy going to send me away like Mommy did?" "I do not know," Linda had replied. "That depends on how much trouble you cause. If you can learn to be quieter and less demanding, maybe he will want to keep you around." The recording continued, with Linda giving Emma specific instructions on how to behave around me to avoid being sent away. She told Emma not to ask for help with homework, not to request bedtime stories, and not to bother me when I seemed tired or stressed. Suddenly, so many of Emma's recent behaviors made perfect sense. She had stopped asking me to read to her at bedtime because Linda had convinced her it was too much trouble. She had stopped coming to me with scraped knees or bad dreams because she thought it would make me want to get rid of her. She had become quiet and withdrawn because she was living in constant fear of being abandoned again. "There's more," Robert said, selecting another file. "This one is from last Friday." The recording began with Emma asking Linda about a drawing she had made at school. "Grandma, look what I drew. It's our family. There's Daddy and me and you and Grandpa." "That's nice, dear," Linda's voice said dismissively. "But you know real families are supposed to have a mommy and a daddy living in the same house. Your family is broken, which is why your daddy has to work so much and why you have to stay with us all the time." Emma's voice smaller now. "Can families be fixed?" "Some can," Linda replied. "But your daddy made a lot of mistakes and now you are all paying the price for them. Sometimes when families break, they stay broken forever." I had to stop Robert before he could play any more recordings. My hands were clenched into fists and I was struggling to maintain control of my temper in front of Emma. The systematic emotional abuse my mother had been inflicting on my daughter was far worse than I had imagined. But Robert was not finished revealing the scope of Linda's deception. He cleared his throat and looked directly at me. "There's something else you need to know. She has not just been recording Linda's conversations with Emma. I also captured some phone conversations she had when she thought I was not listening." He selected a file labeled "Linda Phone Call Jessica" and pressed play. My sister's voice filled the room, followed by my mother's. "So, what exactly should I comment on your post?" Jessica was asking. "Just something supportive," Linda replied. "Make it sound like you agree that it is a relief when Marcus finally picks up Emma. I want people to understand that we have been sacrificing our retirement to help him, and we deserve some recognition for everything we have done. Are you sure this is a good idea, Mom? What if Marcus sees it? Let him see it. Maybe it will open his eyes to how much work Emma really is. And if other people start commenting and agreeing with us, maybe he will realize he needs to make some changes to this arrangement." "What kind of changes?" "I do not know yet. Maybe find somewhere else for her to go after school. Maybe send her to live with Sarah's parents in California. Maybe just accept that she needs more structure and discipline than he is willing to provide." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Linda and Jessica discussing various ways to pressure me into alternative childcare arrangements. They talked about Emma as if she were a problem to be solved rather than a little girl who needed love and stability. As the recording ended, I looked at Jessica's Facebook comment with new understanding. Her "congrats, Mom" was not a spontaneous response of support. It was a calculated move designed to maximize the impact of Linda's cruel post. Emma had been standing quietly beside me throughout this entire revelation, listening to recording after recording of her grandmother saying terrible things about her. I knelt down and pulled her into another hug, trying to shield her from hearing any more. "Emma, sweetie, I need you to know that everything Grandma said was wrong. None of those things are true, and none of this is your fault." Emma looked up at me with those big brown eyes and asked the question that nearly destroyed me. "Daddy does this? Mean Grandma does not love me anymore?" Before I could answer, Linda suddenly stood up from her chair and walked toward us. "Of course I love you, Emma. Grandma was just having some bad days, that is all. Sometimes grown-ups say things they do not mean when they are feeling stressed." I immediately moved to position myself between Linda and Emma. "Do not," I said firmly. "Do not try to minimize this or make excuses. Do not confuse her any more than you already have." But Linda was not finished. "Marcus, you are blowing this completely out of proportion. Yes, I lost my temper a few times, but that does not mean I do not care about Emma. I have been taking care of her every day for almost 2 years. That has to count for something." "Taking care of her," I repeated incredulously. "You have been psychologically abusing her. You have been teaching her to hate herself and fear abandonment. That is not taking care of her. That is damaging her." Robert, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. "Linda, you need to stop. Just stop talking and listen to what you have done." But as devastating as these recordings were, they were apparently only the beginning of what my father had uncovered. He looked at me with an expression of deep regret and said, "Marcus, there is something else, something even worse that you need to know about." Robert's revelation that there was something even worse sent a chill down my spine. Emma was still pressed against my side, and I could feel her small body trembling. The poor child had already heard far too much, but I needed to understand the full scope of what had been happening. "Emma, sweetheart," I said gently, "I need you to go sit in Grandpa's truck for a few minutes while the grown-ups finish talking. Here are the keys so you can listen to music if you want." Emma took the keys without argument. She was clearly exhausted by everything she had witnessed and seemed relieved to have permission to leave the room. After she walked outside and closed the front door behind her, I turned back to my father. "What else, Dad?" Robert took a deep breath and selected another file on his phone. "This recording is from 3 days ago. Linda was talking to Jessica again, but this time they were not just complaining about Emma. They were making actual plans." He pressed play, and once again the voices of my mother and sister filled the room. "I called that number you gave me," Linda was saying. "The one for reporting neglectful parents. I told them Marcus leaves Emma with us all day every day and that he does not seem interested in actually parenting her himself." Jessica's voice. "What did they say?" "They said they would look into it. They asked about Emma's living conditions, whether Marcus feeds her properly, things like that. I may have mentioned that his house is not always as clean as it should be, and that Emma often comes to us in clothes that do not fit right." My blood ran cold as I realized what I was hearing. Linda had contacted Child Protective Services and made false reports about my parenting. "Are you sure this is the right approach, Mom?" Jessica asked on the recording. "What if they just give Marcus a warning, and then he does not let us see Emma anymore?" "Then we will petition for custody," Linda replied matter-of-factly. "I have been documenting everything for months. Emma is clearly not thriving in Marcus's care. Look how quiet and withdrawn she has become. Look how clingy she is. Those are signs of a child who is not getting proper attention and stability at home." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Linda had been systematically building a case against me while pretending to be supportive. Even worse, she was using Emma's emotional distress, which Linda herself had caused, as evidence that I was an unfit parent. The recording continued. "I already talked to a lawyer who specializes in grandparents' rights. He said that if we can prove Marcus is not providing adequate care, we might be able to get at least partial custody. Emma would be better off living with us full-time anyway. She needs consistent rules and expectations." "What about Robert? Is he okay with all this?" Linda's laugh was bitter. "Robert does what I tell him to do. He knows I am right about this situation even if he is too soft-hearted to admit it. Emma needs a firm hand, not a father who lets her get away with everything because he feels guilty about the divorce. I looked at Robert, who was staring at the floor with shame written across his features. "Dad, did you know about this?" "Not until yesterday," he said quietly. I overheard her on the phone with the lawyer and realized how far she was planning to take this. That is when I knew I had to tell you everything. But apparently there was still more. Robert selected yet another recording, this one labeled with yesterday's date. "This is the conversation that finally convinced me I had to speak up," he said before pressing play. Linda's voice came through the speaker, but this time she was not talking to Jessica. She was talking to someone else entirely. "Sarah, it's Linda Marcus's mother. Yes, I know it has been a long time. Listen, I am calling because I think you should know what is happening with Emma." My ex-wife's voice, distant and tinny through the phone connection. "Is she okay? Is something wrong?" "She is physically fine," Linda said, "but I am very concerned about her emotional well-being. Marcus has been struggling to handle single parenthood and Emma is paying the price. She has become withdrawn and anxious. She cries frequently and has trouble sleeping. I think she needs her mother." Sarah's voice. "Linda, we have been through this. I cannot be a mother right now. I am not in the right place mentally or emotionally to take care of a child. But you could be." Linda pressed. "You have been away for 2 years. Surely you have had time to figure things out. Emma asks about you constantly. She wants to understand why you left and whether you are ever coming home." This was a complete lie. Emma rarely mentioned Sarah anymore, and when she did, it was usually to ask matter-of-fact questions about where her mother lived or what she was doing. She had largely accepted Sarah's absence and had stopped expressing hope for her return. The conversation continued with Linda painting a deliberately distorted picture of Emma's life. She described me as overwhelmed and incapable of providing proper care. She suggested that Emma was suffering from my neglect and needed either her mother's return or a more stable living situation with her grandparents. "I have been taking care of Emma every day while Marcus works," Linda told Sarah. "I see how much she struggles with the uncertainty in her life. Children need consistency and security, neither of which Marcus is able to provide right now." Sarah sounded uncertain. "I do not know Linda. Even if I wanted to come back, which I am not sure I do, Marcus would never agree to let me back into Emma's life after everything that happened." "You would not need Marcus's permission if you petitioned the court for custody," Linda replied smoothly, "especially if you had evidence that he was not adequately caring for Emma. I would be willing to testify about what I have observed." The recording ended, and I stood in stunned silence. My mother had not only been abusing Emma emotionally, but she had also been actively working to undermine my parental rights. She had contacted Child Protective Services with false allegations, consulted with a lawyer about pursuing custody, and even reached out to my ex-wife to encourage her to return and take Emma away from me. "When exactly did she make this call to Sarah?" I asked. "2 days ago," Robert replied, "right before she scheduled the CPS home visit." "She scheduled a home visit?" Robert nodded grimly. "They are coming to your house tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. Linda gave them your address and told them you would be available to meet with them." I realized that Linda had been planning this entire campaign for weeks, possibly months. The Facebook post had not been an isolated incident or a moment of poor judgment. It had been part of a calculated effort to publicly document her complaints about Emma and build a case for alternative custody arrangements. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and I realized she must have seen the Facebook post and the responses it was generating. I answered the call and immediately put it on speaker so Robert could hear both sides of the conversation. "Marcus." Jessica's voice sounded nervous and uncertain. "I just wanted to call and explain about that comment I left on Mom's post. I did not really think about how it would sound." "Really?" I said coldly. "Because according to Dad's recordings, you and Mom planned exactly what you were going to comment." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When Jessica finally spoke, her voice was much smaller. "Marcus, I can explain." "Go ahead. Explain why you participated in publicly humiliating my daughter." Jessica began crying. Mom said you were struggling and that Emma was having a hard time adjusting to the divorce. She said you were too proud to ask for help directly, so we needed to find ways to support you without making you feel like you were failing. And calling Emma a stupid burden was supposed to be supportive. No, that part was not my idea, Jessica said quickly. Mom wrote that post on her own. When she asked me to comment, she just said to write something that showed I understood how hard it has been for her to help with childcare. I did not know she was going to use such horrible language about Emma. I could hear the genuine remorse in my sister's voice, but I was still struggling to understand how she could have participated in this at all. Jessica, Emma is 6 years old. How could you think it was okay to post anything that suggested she was a burden? I do not know, she admitted through her tears. Mom has a way of making everything sound reasonable when she explains it. She said Emma would never see the post anyway and that it might help you understand how much work it has been for her to provide free childcare every day. Free childcare, I repeated. Jessica. She volunteered to help. I never forced her into anything. And if she was unhappy with the arrangement, she should have talked to me directly instead of taking it out on Emma. Jessica was quiet for a moment before asking, Marcus, is it true that Dad has been recording Mom's conversations? Yes, and those recordings show that Mom has been systematically emotionally abusing Emma for months. They also show that you and Mom have been planning ways to pressure me into giving up custody. Jessica gasped. What are you talking about? Mom never said anything to me about custody. She just said we needed to help you see that you needed more support. Jessica, I am going to play something for you and I want you to listen very carefully. I took Robert's phone and selected the recording of Linda and Jessica discussing the false CPS report. As Jessica's own voice came through the speaker, acknowledging that Linda had contacted authorities and discussing potential custody arrangements, I could hear her crying harder on the other end of the phone. Oh my God, she whispered when the recording ended. Marcus, I swear I did not understand what she was really planning. She told me she was just going to ask for parenting resources for you, not file a complaint. What about the lawyer, Jessica? Did you know she consulted a lawyer about grandparents' rights? No, Jessica said firmly. I never heard anything about that. Marcus, you have to believe me. If I had known she was planning to try to take Emma away from you, I never would have gone along with any of this. I wanted to believe my sister, but trust was in short supply at this moment. What about the Facebook post? Even if you did not write it, you saw the language Mom used. How could you read the words "stupid burden" and think it was appropriate to congratulate her? Jessica was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Because I was angry at you. Angry at me for what? For getting divorced and disrupting everyone's life. For needing so much help and then acting like you were doing fine on your own. For letting Sarah walk away and leaving the rest of us to pick up the pieces. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Jessica, I never asked you to pick up any pieces. I asked Mom and Dad for help with childcare and they volunteered. If that was a problem for any of you, you should have said so. It is not that simple, Jessica replied. Mom felt obligated to help because you did not have any other options. And then Emma started having behavioral problems, which made everything more stressful. Emma does not have behavioral problems, I said firmly. Emma has been responding to months of emotional abuse from our mother. The phone call continued for another 10 minutes, with Jessica gradually admitting to more and more details about Linda's campaign against me. She revealed that Linda had been complaining about Emma to various family members for months, always framing her concerns as worry about my ability to cope as a single father. She had also been collecting what she called evidence of my inadequate parenting, including photos of Emma in clothes that Linda deemed inappropriate, and documentation of times when I was late picking Emma up. She made it sound like she was trying to help, Jessica kept repeating. She said Emma needed more stability and that you were too overwhelmed to see it. When I finally ended the call, I looked at Robert, who had been listening to the entire conversation, with an expression of increasing dismay. Dad, how long have you known that Mom felt this way about helping with Emma? Robert shook his head slowly. I knew she was frustrated sometimes, but I thought it was just normal stress. I never imagined she was saying such cruel things to Emma when I was not around. And I definitely did not know about the CPS call or the lawyer until this week. But you must have seen signs. You must have noticed that Emma was becoming more withdrawn. I did notice, Robert admitted. But Linda convinced me that it was a normal adjustment to starting school or anxiety about Sarah being gone. She always had explanations that made sense at the time. I realized that Linda had been manipulating not just Emma and me, but Robert and Jessica as well. She had presented herself as the long-suffering grandmother who was sacrificing her retirement to help her struggling son, when in reality she had been systematically damaging everyone involved. But according to Robert, even these revelations were not the end of the story. He looked at me with an expression that suggested there was still more devastating news to come. Marcus, he said quietly, there is one more thing I need to show you. Something I discovered when I went through Linda's desk yesterday after hearing her talk to that lawyer. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a bank statement. She has been stealing from Emma's college fund. The bank statement Robert handed me showed transactions I could not immediately comprehend. My eyes scanned the numbers, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The account balance, which should have contained nearly $18,000 in college savings for Emma, showed only $2,734. Dad, what am I looking at here? Robert pointed to a series of withdrawals, each one for amounts between $500 and $1,500 spanning the past 6 months. Linda has been taking money from the account we set up for Emma's education. She has withdrawn over $15,000. I felt dizzy as the reality of this financial betrayal sank in. When Emma was born, my parents had insisted on opening a joint savings account to help fund her future college expenses. Both Robert and I were signatories on the account, but I had trusted them completely and rarely checked the statements. I contributed $300 every month, and my parents had been adding smaller amounts whenever they could afford it. What has she been using the money for? Legal fees, Robert said grimly. I found receipts in her desk drawer. She has been paying that grandparents' rights attorney for consultations and document preparation. She also hired a private investigator to follow you around and document your parenting. The scope of Linda's deception was growing exponentially with each new revelation. She hired someone to spy on me. Robert nodded and pulled out a manila folder from behind the couch cushions where he had apparently hidden it. I found this in her bedroom. It contains photos of you and Emma, notes about your daily routines, and reports about your house and lifestyle. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of photographs that had clearly been taken without my knowledge. Pictures of me dropping Emma off at school while talking on my phone. Pictures of Emma playing alone in our backyard while I was presumably inside the house. Pictures of our garbage cans on the curb with the bags partially open, showing contents that could be interpreted as evidence of poor nutrition or careless housekeeping. The written reports were even more disturbing. The private investigator had documented everything from the condition of my front lawn to the number of hours Emma spent in front of the television. Every observation was framed in the most negative possible light. When Emma fell off her bicycle in our driveway and scraped her knee, it was reported as inadequate supervision resulting in preventable injury. When I ordered pizza for dinner instead of cooking, it became frequent reliance on unhealthy convenience foods. How long has this been going on? I asked. Based on the dates, about 4 months, Robert replied. She started the investigation right around the time she began making those recordings of her conversations with Emma. I realized that Linda had been building a comprehensive case against me, complete with financial resources stolen from my own daughter's college fund. The Facebook post was not an isolated incident of poor judgment. It was part of a calculated campaign to publicly document her grievances and build support for her position. Dad, I need to ask you directly. Did you know about any of this? The stolen money, the private investigator, the legal consultations. Robert looked me straight in the eye. Marcus, I swear to you that I knew nothing about the money or the investigator until yesterday. I started getting suspicious about her phone calls and decided to search her belongings when she was at the grocery store. That is when I found the bank statements and the investigator's reports. What about the recordings you made? When did you start doing that? About 4 months ago, Robert admitted. I started noticing that Emma seemed different after spending time with Linda. She was more anxious, more clingy, more easily upset. At first I thought it might be normal adjustment issues, but then I caught Linda saying some harsh things to Emma when she thought I was not listening. I started recording everything to try to understand what was really happening. I studied my father's face, looking for any sign that he was not being completely honest with me. What I saw was genuine shame and regret. Robert had recognized that something was wrong, but instead of confronting Linda directly or telling me about his concerns, he had chosen to secretly document the abuse while allowing it to continue. Dad, why did not you just tell me what you were seeing? Why did you let this go on for so long? Robert's voice broke as he answered. Because I was a coward. Because I knew that if I spoke up, it would destroy my marriage and probably our relationship with Emma. I kept hoping Linda would realize what she was doing and stop on her own. But she did not stop. She escalated. I know, Robert whispered, and Emma paid the price for my weakness. I closed the investigator's folder and looked around the living room where I had spent so many hours as a child. This house had always felt like a safe haven, a place where family meant unconditional love and support. Now it felt contaminated by betrayal and manipulation. Dad, I need you to understand something. After today, Emma is never setting foot in this house again. And depending on what happens next, you may not see her again either. Robert's face crumpled. Marcus, please. I know I made terrible mistakes, but Emma is my granddaughter. I love her more than anything. Then you should have protected her instead of enabling her abuse. I pulled out my phone and began making calls. First, I contacted David Chen, a family law attorney who had helped me navigate my divorce proceedings 2 years earlier. When I explained the situation, he immediately agreed to meet with me the following morning. Marcus, you need to document everything, he said. Make copies of all the recordings, the investigator's reports, the bank statements, everything. And whatever you do not let Emma go back to that house. Next, I called Monica to explain that I would need her to watch Emma for the remainder of the day while I dealt with this crisis. Monica, bless her heart, did not ask for details, but simply assured me that Emma was welcome to stay with them overnight if necessary. Take all the time you need, she said. Jake and I are here for whatever you need. Finally, I called my supervisor to explain that I would need several days off to deal with a family emergency involving my daughter's safety. He was understanding and told me to take whatever time was necessary. While I was making these calls, Robert had been gathering additional evidence from Linda's hiding places around the house. He brought me a second manila folder containing correspondence between Linda and her attorney, including a draft petition for emergency custody that painted me as an absent, neglectful father who was failing to provide adequate care for his daughter. The petition contained lies that were so blatant and malicious that I could barely process them. Linda claimed that I frequently left Emma alone at home while I went to bars. She alleged that Emma often came to their house hungry because I forgot to feed her breakfast. She suggested that I had anger management problems and that Emma was afraid of me. Each false accusation was presented with just enough detail to sound credible to someone who did not know the real situation. Linda had clearly spent considerable time crafting a narrative that would support her custody claim, while making me look like an unfit parent. There's something else, Robert said hesitantly. Something I overheard yesterday that I have not told you yet. I looked at him wondering what additional betrayal could possibly be revealed at this point. Linda called Sarah again yesterday afternoon. She told her about the CPS visit and suggested that if Sarah showed up at your house at the same time as the social worker, it might help her case for getting Emma back. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Linda was not just trying to take Emma away from me. She was orchestrating a scenario where either she would gain custody or Sarah would return to claim Emma. Either way, I would lose my daughter. Dad, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Tomorrow, when the CPS worker shows up at my house, you are going to be there with all of these recordings and documents. You are going to tell them exactly what has been happening and take full responsibility for allowing it to continue. Robert nodded quickly. Yes, of course, whatever you need me to do. And if Linda tries to contact Emma, you, me, or anyone else in the family, you're going to call the police immediately. I understand. I looked around the house one more time, trying to memorize the good memories before they became permanently overshadowed by this betrayal. Then I gathered all the evidence Robert had provided and walked toward the front door. Marcus. Robert called after me. I know you have no reason to forgive me, but I want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life trying to make this right. I turned back to face my father, this man who had taught me how to throw a baseball and change a tire and treat women with respect. Dad, forgiveness is going to have to come later. Right now, I need to focus on protecting Emma and undoing the damage that has been done. As I drove away from my childhood home, I realized that my family as I had known it was completely destroyed. But perhaps, if I handled the next few days correctly, I could build something better from the ruins, something honest and healthy and truly protective of the little girl who depended on me for everything. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of phone calls, meetings, and legal preparations. David Chen had agreed to see me first thing in the morning, and I spent the night organizing all the evidence Robert had provided. By dawn, I had created copies of every recording, every document, and every piece of correspondence that documented Linda's campaign against Emma and me. David's office was located in a modern glass building downtown, and I arrived 15 minutes early for our 8 o'clock appointment. When David heard the recordings and saw the investigators' reports, his expression grew increasingly grim. Marcus, this is one of the most systematic cases of parental alienation and emotional abuse I have seen in 20 years of practicing family law, he said. Your mother has essentially waged psychological warfare against a 6-year-old child. What are our options? I asked. First, we file for an immediate restraining order preventing Linda from contacting Emma. Then we contact Child Protective Services before they arrive at your house this afternoon and provide them with all of this evidence. We also need to pursue criminal charges for the theft of Emma's college fund. David explained that the financial theft alone was a felony since the amount exceeded $10,000. Combined with the documentation of emotional abuse and the false CPS report, we had grounds for multiple criminal charges against Linda. What about my father? I asked. He enabled the abuse, but he also provided the evidence that exposed it. That is complicated, David admitted. Robert could potentially face charges for failing to report child abuse, but his cooperation will likely work in his favor. The fact that he documented everything and ultimately came forward suggests he was conflicted rather than malicious. We spent 2 hours developing a comprehensive legal strategy. David would file the restraining order petition that morning, contact the district attorney's office about criminal charges, and prepare a report for Child Protective Services that would demonstrate Linda's false allegations while documenting the real abuse that had occurred. Marcus, I want to prepare you for the possibility that this case could get very ugly, David warned. Linda has already invested significant money and effort into her campaign. She is not going to give up easily, especially if she faces criminal charges. I do not care how ugly it gets, I replied. I just want Emma to be safe and to understand that none of this was her fault. After leaving David's office, I drove to Emma's school to meet with her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez. I explained the situation and asked whether she had noticed any changes in Emma's behavior or academic performance. Mrs. Rodriguez was immediately concerned. Actually, yes. Emma has become much quieter in class over the past few months. She used to participate eagerly in discussions, but now she rarely raises her hand. And she has started asking concerning questions. What kind of questions? Last week she asked me whether children who make their parents tired get sent to live with strangers. 2 weeks before that, she wanted to know why some mommies do not love their children enough to stay with them. Just yesterday, she asked if I thought her daddy would be happier if she was not around. Each of these questions clearly reflected the psychological poison Linda had been feeding Emma. My daughter had been living in a constant state of anxiety about her worth and her future security. Mrs. Rodriguez Emma might need some time off school while we sort this out. She may also benefit from talking to the school counselor. Of course. Whatever Emma needs. She is such a sweet child, and I hate to think that someone has been making her feel bad about herself. I arranged for the school counselor to evaluate Emma the following week and requested that any family members other than myself be prohibited from picking her up or receiving information about her. By noon, I was back home preparing for the CPS visit. Robert arrived at 2:30 carrying a box of additional evidence he had gathered from Linda's belongings. His eyes were red and swollen, suggesting he had been crying. "Marcus, Linda knows that I took all these documents," he said as he set the box on my kitchen table. She came home from her book club meeting and found her desk drawers open. We had a terrible fight. "What did she say?" "She accused me of betraying our marriage and destroying our family. She said I was choosing you and Emma over her and that I would regret it for the rest of my life." I could see the pain in Robert's face as he recounted this confrontation. Despite everything Linda had done, she was still his wife of 38 years, and this situation was destroying their relationship. "Dad, you made the right choice. I know it is hard, but you finally protected Emma when she needed it most." Robert nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "There is something else. Linda has filed for legal separation. She moved in with Jessica yesterday afternoon." This news was actually a relief. It meant Linda would be physically removed from Robert's house and would have less access to information about my family situation. "How are you handling that?" "I am sad," Robert admitted. "But I am also relieved. Living with her had become impossible once I realized what she was really like. I kept looking at her and wondering how she could be so cruel to an innocent child." The doorbell rang at exactly 3 o'clock. I opened the door to find a professional-looking woman in her 40s holding a clipboard and wearing a county ID badge. "Mr. Burnett, I am Karen Williams from Child Protective Services. I understand you were expecting my visit." "Yes, please come in. This is my father, Robert Burnett. He has some important information to share with you." I had prepared extensively for this meeting, and David Chen had advised me on exactly how to present our evidence. Rather than appearing defensive or angry, I needed to be calm, organized, and focused on Emma's well-being. "Ms. Williams, before we begin, I want you to know that the complaints you received about my parenting were filed by my mother as part of a deliberate campaign to gain custody of my daughter. We have extensive evidence of this, including recordings and documents that I would like to share with you." Karen Williams looked surprised. "Mr. Burnett, that is a very serious allegation. Are you suggesting that the report we received was false?" "I am not suggesting it. I am stating it definitively, and I can prove it." Over the next 2 hours, we played selected recordings for Ms. Williams and showed her the investigators' reports, the stolen bank statements, and Linda's correspondence with her attorney. Robert provided additional context about what he had witnessed and when he had started documenting Linda's behavior. Ms. Williams listened to everything with a poker face, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When we finished presenting our evidence, she sat back in her chair and sighed. "Mr. Burnett, in 15 years of doing this job, I have never encountered a case quite like this. The recordings you have provided document clear emotional abuse of your daughter, and the other evidence suggests a coordinated effort to make false allegations against you. What happens next? First, I need to interview Emma privately to assess her current emotional state and understand her perspective on what has been happening. Then, I will be recommending that our office close the investigation against you and open a new investigation into the allegations against your mother." She paused and looked at both Robert and me seriously. "I also need to inform you that I am mandated to report suspected child abuse to law enforcement. Based on what I have heard today, I will be referring this case to the police for potential criminal charges." The interview with Emma took place in our living room while Robert and I waited in the kitchen. Through the doorway, I could see Emma sitting cross-legged on the couch, speaking quietly with Ms. Williams. Occasionally, Emma would nod or shake her head in response to questions, but I could not hear most of their conversation. After 30 minutes, Ms. Williams called me back into the room. Emma immediately ran to me and climbed onto my lap. Emma has been very helpful, Ms. Williams said. She was able to confirm many of the details from your recordings and provided additional information about her experiences. Is she okay? She is a remarkably resilient child, but she has definitely been affected by what she has experienced. I am recommending immediate counseling to help her process these events and rebuild her sense of security. Ms. Williams spent another hour explaining the next steps in the process. The false report against me would be officially dismissed within 48 hours. Linda would be prohibited from contacting Emma pending the outcome of the abuse investigation. And Robert would be required to attend parenting classes before he could have unsupervised visits with Emma. Mr. Burnett, she said as she prepared to leave, I want you to know that you did everything right in this situation. You protected your daughter as soon as you became aware of the problem. You gathered evidence systematically, and you sought appropriate legal assistance. Many parents in similar situations react emotionally and make decisions that hurt their case. After Ms. Williams left, I sat on the couch with Emma curled up beside me. She had been unusually quiet during the entire visit, and I could tell she was processing everything that had happened. Daddy, she said finally, does this mean I do not have to go to Grandma Linda's house anymore? That is right, Princess. You never have to go there again if you do not want to. Emma was quiet for another long moment before asking, was it my fault that Grandma said mean things about me? This was the question I had been dreading, but also the most important one to answer correctly. I pulled Emma closer and looked directly into her eyes. Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Nothing that happened was your fault. Nothing you did or said made Grandma act that way. Some grown-ups have problems that make them say mean things, but that is never the fault of the children around them. But I did spill juice on her carpet. Sweetheart 6-year-olds spill things sometimes. That is completely normal. When that happens, a good grown-up helps you clean it up and tells you that accidents happen. They do not say mean things or make you feel bad about yourself. Emma nodded slowly, and I could see her trying to process this new understanding of the situation. Daddy, will you still love me even if I make mistakes? Emma, I will love you no matter what. Even if you spill juice every single day for the rest of your life, even if you make a million mistakes, even if you have bad days or feel sad or angry, nothing you could ever do would make me stop loving you. That evening, Robert and I had a long conversation about what our relationship would look like going forward. He was genuinely remorseful about his role in allowing Emma's abuse to continue, and he was committed to doing whatever was necessary to rebuild trust. Marcus, I know I failed Emma and I failed you, he said. I was so afraid of confronting Linda that I let a child suffer. That is something I will have to live with for the rest of my life. Dad, the important thing is that you finally did the right thing. Emma is going to need time to heal, but she is going to need her grandfather too. We just have to make sure this never happens again. Robert nodded earnestly. I have already filed for divorce. I cannot stay married to someone who would hurt a child and then lie about it. And I want you to know that I will testify in any legal proceedings if that would help your case. What about your relationship with Jessica and the rest of the family? Jessica has been calling me non-stop since Linda moved in with her. Apparently, Linda has been trying to convince everyone that you have turned me against her and that all the evidence is fabricated somehow. Jessica is starting to see through Linda's manipulation, but some other family members are still taking her side. I realized that this situation was going to divide our extended family for years to come. Some relatives would believe Linda's version of events while others would eventually understand the truth. But I could not control other people's reactions. I could only focus on protecting Emma and helping her heal from the damage that had been done. Dad, I have one more question for you. That box of journals you mentioned in your recordings, the ones where you documented Linda's treatment of me when I was a child, do those really exist in me? Robert's face went pale. Marcus, yes, they exist. I have been carrying that guilt for over 30 years. I need to see them. The next morning, Robert arrived at my house carrying a metal lockbox that looked like it had not been opened in decades. His hands shook as he set it on my kitchen table and fumbled with an old brass key. Marcus, I want you to understand that I was a different person back then, he said as he lifted the lid. I was younger, weaker, and I did not have the courage to stand up to your mother the way I should have. Inside the box were dozens of small notebooks, the kind you might use for grocery lists or phone messages. Each one was labeled with dates spanning from my birth in 1985 through my high school graduation in 2003. Robert pulled out one of the notebooks from when I was 7 years old and opened it to a random page. The entries were brief but devastating. Linda screamed at Marcus for 20 minutes because he tracked mud through the kitchen. Called him stupid and clumsy, told him he ruins everything he touches. Another entry from a week later. Marcus asked for help with homework. Linda told him smart children do not need help and that maybe he is not as smart as we thought. Page after page documented a pattern of emotional abuse that I had somehow blocked from my conscious memory. Reading Robert's careful handwriting, I began to remember incidents I had not thought about in decades. Linda's constant criticism of my appearance, my grades, my friends, my interests, her habit of comparing me unfavorably to other children and suggesting that I was a disappointment. Dad, why did you write all this down if you were not going to do anything about it? Robert wiped tears from his eyes. Because I knew it was wrong, but I did not know how to stop it. I thought maybe if I documented everything someday I would find the courage to confront her or get help. But years passed and I just kept writing and keeping quiet. I flipped through notebook after notebook, watching my childhood unfold through my father's guilty observations. The emotional abuse had been systematic and relentless. Linda had criticized everything from the way I held my fork to the sound of my laugh. She had undermined my confidence, questioned my intelligence, and made me feel like a burden in my own home. The pattern is exactly the same. I realized. Everything she did to Emma, she did to me first. Robert nodded miserably. When I started hearing her talk to Emma the same way, it brought back all those memories I had tried to forget. That is when I knew I could not let it happen again. Reading these journals helped me understand my own struggles with self-confidence and my tendency to second-guess myself in relationships. Linda had spent 18 years teaching me that I was fundamentally flawed, and those messages had shaped my entire adult life. But more importantly, these journals provided crucial evidence for the criminal case against Linda. They established a decades-long pattern of emotional abuse and showed that her treatment of Emma was not an isolated incident, but part of her fundamental character. David Chen was fascinated by the historical documentation when I brought the journals to his office later that day. Marcus, this evidence transforms our entire case. It shows premeditation pattern and a complete lack of remorse spanning 40 years. What kind of charges is Linda facing? Grand theft for stealing from Emma's college fund, filing false reports to government agencies, child endangerment, and emotional abuse. With this historical evidence, she could be looking at several years in prison. The criminal investigation moved quickly once the police had access to all our evidence. Detective Maria Santos, who specialized in domestic crimes involving children, was assigned to the case. She interviewed Emma using specially trained child psychologists and gathered additional evidence from Mrs. Patterson, Emma's teacher, and several other witnesses. Mr. Burnett, I have been investigating child abuse cases for 12 years, Detective Santos told me. What your mother did to your daughter represents some of the most calculated psychological abuse I have encountered. The fact that she documented her own cruel behavior on social media suggests she felt completely justified in her actions. Within a week, Linda was arrested at Jessica's house and charged with 4 felonies. The local newspaper picked up the story, and suddenly everyone in our small community knew about the grandmother who had stolen from her granddaughter's college fund and waged a campaign of emotional abuse against a 6-year-old child. Jessica called me the day after Linda's arrest, sobbing and apologizing repeatedly. Marcus, I had no idea how deep this went. When the police showed me those recordings and the journals about your childhood, I felt sick to my stomach. How did I not see what kind of person she really was? Because she hid it well, I replied, and because she manipulated all of us into believing her version of reality. Can you ever forgive me for participating in this? That question hung between us for several long moments. Jessica was my sister, and despite her poor judgment, I believed she had been manipulated rather than malicious. Jessica, I can forgive you, but our relationship will never be the same. You participated in the public humiliation of my daughter even if you did not understand the full context. That is going to take time to get past. I understand, she said quietly. I just want you to know that I will do whatever it takes to make this right. The legal proceedings stretched on for months, but Emma's recovery began immediately. I found an excellent child psychologist, Dr. Patricia Hoffman, who specialized in treating young victims of emotional abuse. Dr. Hoffman used play therapy and age-appropriate techniques to help Emma understand that the cruel things Linda had said were lies. Emma is remarkably resilient, Dr. Hoffman told me after their 4th session. Children her age are naturally inclined to trust the adults in their lives, which made her vulnerable to your mother's manipulation. But that same trusting nature makes them responsive to positive intervention. Emma's progress was visible almost immediately. She began sleeping through the night without nightmares. She started participating enthusiastically in school activities again. Most importantly, she stopped asking anxious questions about whether I was planning to send her away. Robert attended every one of his required parenting classes and completed a course on recognizing and reporting child abuse. He also started individual therapy to address his decades of enabling behavior and his complicated grief over the end of his marriage. I realize now that I was never really protecting Linda, he told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings. I was protecting myself from having to face the truth about who she was. Emma paid the price for my cowardice. Gradually, I began allowing Robert to spend supervised time with Emma again. She was initially wary of him, but with gentle encouragement and Dr. Hoffman's guidance, they slowly rebuilt their relationship. Robert was patient, consistent, and completely honest about his past mistakes. "Grandpa Robert, why did you let Grandma Linda say mean things to me?" Emma asked him directly during one visit. Robert knelt down to her level and looked her straight in the eyes. "Because I was scared, and I made a very bad choice. I should have protected you right away, and I am sorry that I did not. But I promise that I will never let anyone hurt you with words or actions ever again." Emma considered this answer carefully before nodding. "Okay, but if someone is mean to me, you have to tell Daddy right away. I promise." The financial component of our case was resolved when the district attorney's office negotiated a plea agreement that required Linda to pay full restitution for Emma's college fund, plus damages for therapy and legal expenses. The total amount came to nearly $30,000, which Linda had to pay from her retirement accounts. More importantly, Linda was sentenced to 2 years of supervised probation and was permanently prohibited from contacting Emma. She was also required to complete anger management classes and psychological evaluation, though the court noted that her lack of remorse made successful rehabilitation unlikely. The most surprising development came 6 months after Linda's arrest. Jessica had gradually distanced herself from Linda as the full scope of the abuse became clear, and Linda was forced to find her own apartment. Living alone for the first time in decades, Linda apparently began to understand the consequences of her actions. She wrote me a letter which David Chen reviewed before I decided whether to read it. "It is not an admission of guilt," David warned, "but it does seem to show some recognition that her behavior was harmful." Phew. The letter was brief and formal, but it contained the first acknowledgement Linda had ever made that her treatment of Emma was wrong. Marcus. I realize that my actions caused harm to Emma and damaged our family relationships. I do not expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I understand why you felt the need to protect her from me. I hope someday Emma can have a happy life without the burden of what I put her through. I showed the letter to Dr. Hoffman, who suggested that it might be beneficial for Emma to know that Linda had acknowledged her wrongdoing, even if Emma was not ready for any direct contact. Someday when Emma is older and has fully processed her experiences, she may have questions about her grandmother's motivation, Dr. Hoffman explained. Having a record of Linda's acknowledgement could help Emma understand that the abuse was about Linda's problems, not about Emma's worth as a person. A year after the criminal case concluded, Emma and I had developed new routines and traditions that helped solidify our family bond. We started having weekly pizza and movie nights where Emma could choose any film she wanted, and we would discuss the story afterward. We began taking weekend trips to explore different parts of Ohio, visiting museums, parks, and historical sites. Most importantly, I made sure Emma understood that she could talk to me about anything without fear of judgment or consequences. We established regular check-ins where I would ask how she was feeling and whether anyone in her life was treating her well. Daddy. Emma said during one of these conversations, "I think I understand now why Grandma Linda was mean to me." "Oh, what do you think?" Dr. Hoffman says that some grown-ups have hurt feelings inside that make them want to hurt other people. Grandma Linda probably had hurt feelings, but that does not mean she was allowed to give them to me. I was amazed by Emma's emotional maturity and her ability to articulate such complex concepts at age 7. That is exactly right, sweetheart. Hurt people sometimes hurt other people, but that is never okay, and it is never the fault of the person being hurt. Robert had also made remarkable progress in rebuilding his relationship with both Emma and me. He sold his large house and moved into a small apartment just 10 minutes away, making it easier for him to provide regular support without overwhelming our space. He attended every important event in Emma's life: school plays, soccer games, birthday parties, and parent-teacher conferences. Marcus. He told me on Emma's 8th birthday, "I know I can never fully make up for the years I failed to protect her and you, but I want to spend whatever time I have left being the grandfather she deserves." Dad, you have already shown that you are capable of change. Emma sees that, and so do I. The extended family relationships remained complicated. Some relatives had accepted the truth about Linda's behavior and maintained connections with Emma and me. Others continued to believe Linda's claims that she was the victim of a conspiracy, and we simply stopped communicating with them. Jessica had worked hard to rebuild our relationship, attending family therapy sessions and consistently demonstrating her commitment to Emma's well-being. She became one of Emma's most enthusiastic supporters, never missing an opportunity to tell her niece how proud she was of her strength and resilience. Emma. Jessica said during a family barbecue when Emma was 9, "I want you to know that you taught all of us what courage looks like. You were brave enough to tell the truth even when it was scary, and that helped save other children from being hurt." Emma smiled and hugged her aunt. "I think Daddy was the brave one. He made the mean stuff stop." As Emma approached her 10th birthday, I reflected on how far our family had come since that devastating night when I discovered Linda's Facebook post. Emma had grown into a confident, articulate, emotionally intelligent child who understood her own worth and refused to accept mistreatment from anyone. She had learned to advocate for herself in age-appropriate ways, telling her teachers when something bothered her and asking for help when she needed it. She had developed strong friendships with children who shared her interests in art, reading, and soccer. Most importantly, she had learned to trust her own instincts about people and situations. Daddy. She told me one evening as I was tucking her into bed, "I am glad Grandma Linda's meanness got discovered. Not because I wanted her to get in trouble, but because now I know that when grown-ups are mean to kids, other grown-ups will make it stop." That is right, sweetheart. And you know that if anyone ever makes you feel bad about yourself again, you can tell me immediately and I will handle it. Emma nodded confidently. I know. And I also know that I am not a burden. I am wanted and loved and important. Hearing my daughter speak with such certainty about her own value brought tears to my eyes. She had not only healed from the damage Linda inflicted, but had emerged stronger and wiser than many adults I knew. The life lesson that emerged from our painful experience was one that I hoped Emma would carry with her. Always, sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones we need protection from. True strength comes not from enduring abuse silently, but from finding the courage to expose it and break the cycle. Family is not just about blood relationships. It is about the people who truly love and support you unconditionally, who celebrate your successes and help you through your challenges, who see your worth even when you cannot see it yourself. Emma had learned that she deserved to be treated with kindness and respect, and that she had the power to speak up when those standards were not met. These lessons would serve her well throughout her life, helping her build healthy relationships and recognize unhealthy ones before they could cause lasting damage. As for me, I had learned that protecting someone you love sometimes requires difficult choices and uncomfortable confrontations. I had discovered that I was stronger and braver than I thought, and that I was capable of breaking generational patterns of dysfunction. Most importantly, I had learned that healing is possible, that families can be rebuilt on foundations of honesty and mutual respect, and that children are far more resilient than we often give them credit for. Emma and I had created a new kind of family, one that included Robert and Jessica, and the friends who had supported us through our darkest moments. It was not the family I had imagined when Emma was born, but it was honest, loving, and protective of everyone involved. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice to cut ties with family members who were harming someone you love? How did you find the courage to speak up when someone you trusted was betraying that trust? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with others who might benefit from hearing about the importance of protecting children from emotional abuse, even when it comes from unexpected sources. And do not forget to subscribe for more stories about family resilience and the courage to do what is right even when it is difficult. Thank you for listening to our journey, and I hope Emma's story inspires others to trust their instincts and protect the vulnerable people in their lives.